Hey again! This week's Q&A is a pretty lengthy one, but useful nonetheless. The request has been to fill out the Power 19 Questions of Tabletop Role-Playing Game Design. Silly title, I know, but whatevs. There's some good questions in here, even if they're a little bit repetitive sometimes. Since there's a lot of them, let's dig right in, shall we? So, first off, number 1 instead of, number 20, since there is no 20 and 1 seems like a good place to start. So, number 1, what is your game about? In short, Saorsa is about redemption, self-discovery, and freedom. In a slightly longer form, the exploration of characters to learn who they are as individuals in ways they may not know about themselves, and what happens when they're imprisoned, stripped of their freedom, until they redeem themselves in the eyes of their captors. As an aside, Saorsa also strives to teach players new to role-playing how to step into their character's shoes, how to handle dialogue, and other tasks many players may not be familiar with. Question number 2. What do the characters do? The characters have committed a sin against themselves by going against what they supposedly value most. What's expected of them is to understand why they committed this sin and to learn who they truly are, because had they known, they would not have done so in the first place. The entire planet of Saorsa is designed to provide trials and challenges to test the characters in a variety of ways for them to better make their way through this process, whether by succeeding or failing along the way. This can range from political intrigue to combat to standard adventuring to overthrowing the very warden in charge of the planet. So, question number 3. What do the players, including the GM if there is one, do? The players build and step into the shoes of a character for each of them to control personally. This process creates a large number of innate plot hooks to explore, with GMs providing potential ways for characters to learn more about themselves along their travels, both as individuals and as a group. Additional to such are any number of other major quests and conflicts to be explored along the way. I'd go into more nuance, but we'd be here all day. Mostly, it comes down to the GM presenting the players with choices, and the players making choices based upon what's presented, and more specifically, making choices which make sense within the context of what their character would do in that situation. This also includes having a growing understanding of who their character is based upon the situations which occur that shape and mold the character in ways that don't apply to the player themselves. Number 4. How does your setting or lack thereof reinforce what your game is about? Saorsa as a planet is a penal colony / rehabilitation facility. The world itself shifts and changes with an entire army of druids dedicated to creating new creatures to fight, changing the landscape, and otherwise presenting a wide range of personalized challenges. The setting is designed specifically to be very broad and open, so that GMs can do pretty much anything they want with it, from importing new factions, new races or species, or storylines, or characters from other games if they so choose. Everything revolves around the idea that characters are dragged from the farthest reaches of the galaxy and are deemed guilty even without trial, caged on the world and told to prove themselves. From angelic caseworkers to a downright psychotic warden, and the promise of returning home, as well as greater power, everything in this setting is dedicated either towards guiding the characters through this path of self-discovery, or to allow for whatever the GM can imagine to take place. Question number 5. How does the character creation of your game reinforce what your game is about? The first step is to create a baseline of what's normal for the species, then for the character to determine what their personal values are, whether those mesh with normalcy or go against the grain, and why. From there, characters gain a great deal of customization options focused around creating a character with an actual personality, personal preferences, and reasons for why they do what they do. This process also leads to a great number of plot hooks for players to explore, ensuring that the characters themselves are the center stage of any game. Question number 6. What types of behaviors / styles of play does your game reward and punish if necessary? All and none. The key behind Saorsa is that there is no right answer. No matter what a character's sin may be, there's no correct outcome. A character may decide that they've made a mistake and redouble their efforts to emphasize their initial values. Or, just as easily, they may decide that their sin was their true self showing through. Player characters can be evil, good, murder everything in sight, or use stealth and social pressure to avoid combat entirely. All that matters is that the character solves issues they're faced with in some way, shape, or form, and that the method of such bring them closer to an understanding of themselves. The specific methods used are largely irrelevant, as is the end goal of what the character winds up being. It's pretty much purely a story about their journey, not the destination. That means if a character wants to say, screw the system, and punch the warden in the face, because that's what they've decided their true them desires, then they're free to do so. Or at least try. Success may take a bit more effort. Question number 7. How are the behaviors and style of play rewarded or punished in your game? Characters who solve problems regardless of the methods employed are rewarded with things like experience or steps or strides upon the path to redemption. This mechanic grants rewards from stat bonuses, skill tier unlocks, and level increases as characters develop a greater understanding of themselves. Characters are only truly punished if they completely go against the idea of even trying. For example, a character who sits down, refuses to budge, and lets themselves starve to death will find themselves rudely awakened, weaker than even when they started, and the challenges they've been presented to overcome will become just that much more complex. So long as the characters either have a purpose they work towards, or at least are moving in some direction, even if they're not really sure what they're looking for or trying to achieve yet, they'll be rewarded to some degree, though they gain far more when they make progress towards the game's goals. Question number 8. How are the responsibilities of narration and credibility divided in your game? Saorsa focuses heavily upon the concept of player choice, and narration comes down to describing the choices made. Very little in the game is resolved purely via automation, without the players being able to interject and do something of value. The GM is expected to provide situations and choices for players to interact with, on a two-way street of storytelling rather than a static single-direction narration taking place. Question number 9. What does your game do to command the player's attention, engagement, and participation? What does the game do to make them care? Oh, there's a lot of things on a lot of levels, but some of the big ones are things like players' choices mattering, their personal backstories and plot hooks being a large part of every campaign so that they're personally invested in their character, and whichever method a player chooses to solve problems is designed to give lots to do beyond just rolling for stealth or rolling to attack. The lack of automated events with less reliance on dice and more emphasis put towards player choice keeps the personal level engaged constantly. For a broader context, players and their characters become engaged with the world itself by attaching them to it via a home base for operations, giving them such things as a town to call their own and increase the prosperity of, which directly benefits them as well. Other major aspects include having characters joining factions to give them more personalized tasks and rewards, which relate directly to the character's goals, and for most upward mobility in terms of strength, involving completing tasks of personal value rather than arbitrary events. Well, we're halfway through. So, question number 10. What are the resolution mechanics of your game like? Well, while there's a 1d20 plus modifier set up for handling contested events with a sliding scale of what actually becomes the outcome, the vast majority of resolution mechanics comes down to player choice instead of die rolling. It's primarily using the right tool for the right job or solving problems in interesting ways that work well, more than just having higher raw stats most of the time. Stats and other mechanics come into play mostly when a poor choice is made, or when an equal or near equal opposition is made against the player's actions. Question number 11. How do the resolution mechanics reinforce what your game is about? Again, choice is paramount in Saorsa. Characters don't just toss themselves at an enemy and hope they roll well. It's their choices in life which determines the outcome first and foremost. This doesn't just go for combat, but for other situations as well, such as a well-defined stealth system and a system for handling complex social interactions, wherein both are resolved based off of the choices the player makes based on what options they have available, rather than just rolling and being done with it. Question number 12. Do characters in your game advance? And if so, how? In many ways. There's both a tiered point-buy setup and a more traditional level-based setup as well. Characters gain specializations in particular tasks by leveling up a specific class, but they also gain a wide range of choices via skills, talents, and spells. Note that every character has access to all skills and all magic, should they choose to invest in such, and even martial classes are encouraged to learn some spellcraft, and magical classes encouraged to invest in some martial prowess as well. Special talents also allow for additional customization of characters based upon their chosen species. This allows players to customize their character to play the way they personally prefer, with a wide range of perfectly viable options to choose from at any time. So they're not railroaded into a particular path just because it works better. Question number 13. How does the character advancement or lack thereof, reinforce what your game is about. Advancement is bolstered with greater options becoming available as characters learn who they are, from increased level capacity, enhanced skill options, to characters who are more in tune with who they are, being synchronized with their spiritual essence, allowing for greater enchantments to be used at a time. Player choice is ever present, with more emphasis upon building a character that makes sense from the character's perspective. The more the character and the player understand who the character is, the stronger they become. Question number 14. What sort of product or effect do you want your game to produce in or for the players? I'm a little iffy on how this is worded, but let's take a stab at this. Basically, I want players to become emotionally attached to their character, to feel like their personal presence in the world has a meaningful impact upon the outcome of what happens, and for their choices to matter. Question number 15. What areas of your game receive extra attention in color, and why? Well, the player species, more than anything else. They're vastly more detailed in biology, culture, and so on than in any other tabletop role-playing game I've seen to date, due in large part to this being a major part about what sets the baseline for the character's expectations of them, as well as their innate tendencies for mindset. So it's much easier for a player to really get into the head of their character beyond just being a human with pointy ears. Even the humans are given extra attention to draw attention towards comprehending how humans in certain regions and time frames tended to behave and why. Stealth and social situations are also given a lot of extra attention, as these are rarely covered in most combat-focused games, and typically hand-waved away in narrative-heavy games as something for players to roleplay out, without the game interfering and such. These are core components of the game, and are given attention to such in detail due to this. Magic and combat are also heavily invested in for extra attention, so that players have lots of choices of how to go about fighting, and to ensure that distinctive playstyles can be catered to for individuals so that their character's fighting style matches their personality. That there's way too many narrative-based games with little to almost no real combat rules. Combat in Saorsa is both epic and tactical in nature. Question number 16. Which part of your game are you most excited about or interested in, and why? Ooh, toughie. I'd say the species, actually, for the greatest excitement. I can't wait to see these rather alien mindsets come into play, and see players go from having little to no role-playing capacity learn to really grasp even creatures that are distinctly non-human in mindset. Question number 17. Where does your game take the players that other games can't, don't, or won't? First off, really delving into non-human mindsets. Second, the player's choice being more important than the roll of the dice. Third, a strong amalgamation of both combat and narrative. Fourth, character plot hooks and GM coaching in such a way that the player characters are always an intrinsic part of the story rather than incidental. Fifth, really making players question both who their characters really are, but also who the player is. Question number 18. What are your publishing goals for your game? Well, I'm going to be releasing Saorsa free of charge for the basic game. I like to reach as wide of an audience as possible and give players a top-notch quality game to play, even if they're in third world countries or students who can't afford a game and so on. I want to bring role-playing to a much broader audience than has been done before. In terms of finances, I'd like to get enough in donations and eventual sales of expansion content that I can dedicate myself full-time to working on new stuff for Saorsa and live somewhat comfortably with this being my primary job. I'd also really like to make enough to begin producing a video game based upon Saorsa as the base design, and to get comfortable enough that I can write a few Saorsa novels as well. Yeah, it's kind of spread out, but I'm a world designer first and foremost. I've built an intellectual property that I think a lot of people are going to really enjoy. And I'd like to see more than just me personally making enough money off it to retire if I felt like it, but rather I'd like to make a major impact on the industry as a whole and push the whole industry forward a few steps beyond where we're currently at. And last but not least, who is your target audience for question number 19? A few are being catered to in different ways, but in particular, I'm focusing very heavily on people who have role-played before in other tabletop role-playing games, but have never really played a role, due to focusing more on combat than role-playing in the past. This meshes well with players who are new to tabletop role-playing games in general, and aren't really sure where to begin role-playing. Another demographic I'm aiming for are those who enjoy narrative-based games, but haven't seen much value in combat, viewing it more as a chore. I've targeted this group to show them that even tactical combat can be narrative-based, with lots of choice rather than just tons of numbers. The final major demographic I'm setting my sights on, the fourth such demographic, is players of video game RPGs, especially those who play games like The Elder Scrolls, Mass Effect, or MMORPGs in general. There's a lot of people out there who I think would really appreciate tabletop role-playing games if they got started in on them, but who haven't really had a game that really interests them yet. And I've tried to build Saorsa in such a way that each of these groups can get something great out of it. Normally, there's a huge balancing act between catering to multiple groups, but these groups have been specifically chosen in that there's a ton of overlap between the various demographics, with any 2 or 3 groups at a time sharing a lot of the same desires and interests, so it should work pretty well. Watch me be eating those words 2 years from now. Anyway, that's it for this week, and the full 19 questions have been answered. So with that, I'm out. I'll see you next time.